Thank you so much for joining. Please write your name, organization, and contact details in chat box. I'm Radha Paudel, author, activist, and founder for Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. I'm speaking from the Secretariat Office of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation based in Kathmandu, Nepal. Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation is a survivor-led global network for changing narratives from hygiene to dignity and 5 days bleeding to life cycle approach. It is established in 2019 as a network. Now, over 90 members from all around the globe. For details, I encourage each of you to follow our websites, social sites, www.dignifiedmenstruation.org. As you are aware, Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation has been hosting webinars since beginning in various themes of dignified menstruation and International Dignified Menstruation Day. Today, we are here to mark the International Women's Day for 2025. For marking International Women's Day, we developed the slogan, ensure dignified menstruation to all menstruators. I do repeat, ensure dignified menstruation to all menstruators. In this connection, on behalf of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation, I urge global community, including UN, to mark the dignified menstruation. Without ensuring dignified menstruation, how would we ensure right, equality, and empowerment, which is the slogan of this year from the UN. Dignified menstruation is foundation for ensuring rights, equality, and empowerment in all diverse settings. Before starting the conversation, let me share the logistic. The overall webinar will go for 60 minutes. First 30 minutes, speaker and myself will have a discussion around the theme. Then we will pick up the questions from participants. Please write your questions, comments, or any inputs, either in chat box if you are here in the Zoom, or write in a comment section if you are watching via Facebook page of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. Today we have a speaker all the way from Australia. She is Dr. Ben-Shaul. She trained as a psychologist, psychoanalytic, psychotherapist, and a yoga meditation teacher. She has keen interest in gender studies, and the body began alongside therapeutic trainings, continuing with her research on cultural differences in women's social emotional development. In 2012, she claimed she is lucky to have stumbled upon the Red Tent movement, leading her to study with menstrual awareness educators around the world. Innovatively, this eye-opening awareness entered her clinical psychology practice, to which it is now central. So this is her commitment. Let's welcome to her. Warm welcome, Dr. Tammy.
Thank you.
In general, how do you define the mental health?
Yeah. In general, mental health is the functioning, the way, the cognition and emotions and the expression of the body, how it manifests in how it happens in behavior and relationships. And it basically can be kind of like a positive well-being and a distress and a measure of distress. So mental health is both. right? It holds the whole the whole functioning.
Okay, thank you. People are often use the word like emotional health, psychosocial health,
Yeah.
mental health, and also include in general health.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you explain with the examples
Mm-hmm.
to the ordinary people whether there is a differences or not, or how could we identify the conditions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, human beings, they grow in environments, and they have relationships with themselves, and they have relationships with other people, and they have relationships with groups, and they have relationships with the environment and all the structures around them. And the way that we can tell how a person is doing is how we feel them, really how we feel them when they are walking around in the world, right? I think we all know when somebody is clearly doing very well or when someone is clearly in distress. It's pretty clear to us. We can almost, all of us intuitively know when we see someone who kind of behaves in a way that marks either side of these. So the expression of it, right? We can see it if a person, for example, doesn't get out of bed or doesn't eat or is crying a lot, or if a child is breaking a lot of things or harming animals or going into fights with people. We can tell with teenagers if they are, if they are withdrawn, if they don't leave their room, or if they get into very difficult relationships all the time, or if they sometimes even it's more subtle, right? It can be when people are they're not really connecting. So that's like when it's very, very clear, we all see it and we all know it. But other times we can just sort of feel when something is not exactly right. We just don't know. We sit with someone in the room or we see them in the street, even in the bus station, and we feel something within ourselves, within our own body. We feel like, I'm not sure if I feel comfortable here. And that could be, sometimes it could be just us being fearful or concerned or uncomfortable, but it usually tells something about who's with us.
Okay. In many countries, in many cultures, talking about the mental health is taboo,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
stigma. And
Yes.
how do you see best, because you have been working all around the globe, what kind of mental health issues? I'm not asking about the mental health issues, but I'm asking the social aspect, the political aspect
Yeah. Yeah.
about the
Yes.
mental health.
Yeah. So it's very the self, somebody's expression of themselves is very different in different countries, right? There are cultures and societies that are individualistic and separate, and it's sort of the model maybe of Western Europe or of America and Australia and Canada and the countries that are the more individualistic focused, and the expression of mental health would be one thing, and the regard to mental health will be in one way. And in cultures that are more collectivist, they're more community oriented, they're more family oriented, often they're more traditional. One is often there's kind of like a division between traditional and non-traditional, degrees of religiosity, degrees of how religious cultures are. And all these things develop and they impact how oneself develops. That doesn't mean that there is better or worse mental health. It just means that when you're in your environment, it looks in a particular way. So that's one of the socialization is which culture you grow up in. And in each culture, the way that you stand out, the way that when you feel distress, when you feel something that is continuous sadness, continuous grief. So continuous sadness is grief. Sadness is very natural, but grief is not, right? There's particular situations where everything is appropriate. So that's one layer of it. And the other layer is how, of course, I mean, there's so many factors, but there are factors like whether you come from an urban place or if you come from a rural place, or if you come from villages or if you come from cities, if you come from a particularly educated family or not, if you come from parenting practices that are very punitive or with a lot of punishment or a lot of conditions, and all these things that happen in all cultures. Yeah, but the way that so these things impact people in the same way. So there I can go on and on. Yes, but it is the way that we are does require that there is a close connection and a close attachment to secure and protective people. That is a requirement for well-being. So when there's disruptions to that, all sorts of them, then mental health starts becoming more full of expressions of distress.
Okay. Here, menstrual discrimination is a big umbrella term.
It's a big
According
what,
to
sorry?
the an umbrella term, I mean the
Yes.
big jargon. According to the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation, it includes silence, taboo, um, stigma, restrictions, abuses, denial from resources and services of menstruators throughout the life cycle of the menstruators. This is how we define the menstrual discrimination. That means this is the environment, as you defined earlier. This is the environment, and menstrual discrimination has been practicing across the globe in different forms. So,
Correct.
how do you see, as an expert, how do you see the relationship between menstrual discrimination as a contributing factor for mental well-being?
Yeah. So that's the most important topic, of course. And both you and I made that our lifetime mission, right? This is what we're doing. We have been educated in different countries and in different places, and both of us have come to see that there's that particular situation, the menstrual, you call it the menstrual discrimination, and that this across humanity has been across humanity. It's been employing all the details that you just said, which then leads to the reality that the majority, well, I'd say the real majority, the vast majority of women are overcompensating in life in a way that is not necessary. It's not a necessary condition. So that's the overview. In more detail, of course, every country has a very different regard. All of them have the overview of silencing and humiliation. So shaming and silencing, I don't know any cultures today that don't have that kind of discrimination. So what that leads to, and that research shows this, it leads to, of course, to depression, and of course to anxiety, and of course, so those are the big ones. But more in a more sort of problematic way, it leads to um, to poor body image and poor self-confidence and very low self-worth and all the elements that are even more complicated in their manifestation and is very high numbers in teenage girls across the world, I would say. I haven't really checked it, but there's a lot of research definitely done in Australia and showing that there's more self-harm in girls and a lot of eating disorders and very poor relationships, very low relationships because of these things. And the situation is that there's a fluctuation in these. Some of these things fluctuate, right? Mood and anxiety and those things. The mood, what we call mood disorders, become quite clearly related to menstruation. And the reason for that is because there is a silencing. If there's a silencing, there's no education. Even when there is education around it, it's very basic. It's very technical. It's very functional and pragmatic. Even when the best of cases, even in schools in very open-minded countries, there's kind of like a sort of a technicality, like we're not going to touch this kind of relationship. And so girls receive that information that this is not really something to feel. This is not really something to experience. So there's a disconnection between one's body and one's ability to communicate with it, which of course increases the distress. And because the menstruation is a stress sensitive system, yeah, it's a really important bit of this. When menstruation responds to stress in the body, then what happens is that it starts manifesting in the body as pain and is as a real case of clinical depression. And in all sorts of, in a long time, the more one ignores it, it becomes real physiological problems. And we know there's a lot of menstrual pathology right now in the world for many reasons. But one of it is because you cannot actually live the whole menstrual cycle in a sort of informed way, in a real connected way. I think I can pause there and see if it needs to be slowed
Thank you so much.
down or settled down. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a very much important,
Mm.
and I feel like no one speaking, no one means exceptionally like you, me. Recently, the mental health has a big space in global global community. The mental health, psychosocial counseling keep incorporating here and there. There are so many workshops, training, research are taken place, but I don't see the menstrual discrimination is a determining factor for the mental health or well-being. And even I don't see the WHO's definition strategies incorporate the menstrual discrimination is a issue. So
Mm.
why it has been happening?
Mm.
And the people like you, me, or the organization like Global South Coalition, how could we raise the flag to make it a priority?
Mm.
Would you share based on your experience, please?
Yeah. I think it's a two-part question. One is, of course, everything that I said until now is, it's been like going on like this for maybe about 10,000 years, right? It's different cultures will start measuring when when the dominance of sort of patriarchy happened, right? Like that's different cultures will put a different date to it, but we know that this has been an ongoing process that happened for many thousands of years. So what we have now is that all the structures that are there educating all the professionals. And psychology is, it's like a 200, 300-year profession. Of course, there was philosophy before then, and philosophy also really didn't touch menstruation very much at all. But there's been a situation where this topic has been ignored for so long that you don't really have people who, unless they decide that this is their main kind of interest, or unless they are informed, they don't, that's the situation. The social workers, the psychologists, the therapists, the psychotherapists, even the healers don't really necessarily talk about it, right? There might be some more kind of very alternative professions, right? Like we know that Chinese medicine, for example, or Ayurveda do regard menstruation as a very powerful source of information, but we don't necessarily talk about it as much in schools or in kind of westernized medical clinics, or certainly not universities. So that's one part of the question. That's why it's that way. And mental health is a little bit dominated by kind of Western ideas, by, I'd say, all the things that gave us our degrees and offered us these technologies. So, but it's a bit of a gap. How we do it, I think, is where we're at. It's these kind of conversations. It's all sorts of forums where we try to really bring people's attention. And then we have to invite them to understand that it's a much more, I guess, nuanced and complex and far more natural, health-focused orientation in order to really, really, really take care of the mental health aspect. And I can say one more thing about it, that because there's a big medicalization of menstruation, and that's a very tricky place. Even in psychology, it has become to a place that there are diagnoses that you can have, right? There's premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and there's premenstrual tension and premenstrual exacerbation, which means that whatever mental health condition there is, it gets worse. And all these things points to only one direction, that it is 2 weeks in the month, in the luteal phase, when the body is preparing itself to menstruate. That's when these depressive symptoms come up. That's where anxiety comes up. That's where all other trauma comes up. So the reality of it is that the medical profession would like to kind of offer what it knows how to offer. And what it knows how to offer is medication of different kinds. But the actual breadth of it is that we need to find ways to reduce stress. And we need to understand that in this before menstruation, we need to have different life practices, that nutrition needs to change, that there needs to be maybe a stepping out of the norm. And that actually a lot of these things, the more we educate about them, there's a real kind of way of looking at it, right? Including celebrating it, which of course celebrating it really makes it that it's a dignified experience, right? So the ideal is very, very clear. You're educated really young, you get to celebrate the first bleed, you get to celebrate every bleed. And so it becomes the healing practice and the resolution to this requires that we reach as many professions teachers and academics and nurses and doctors and everyone who's meeting humans, so that now all the women who are kind of around our age start repairing. And it's a great time for it now. It's perfect time. There's perfect timing.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question well?
Thank you so much. It's really, really insightful discussion. Yeah. I'm so much delighted to have you. Individually, I mean, at my personal level, as well as the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation, firmly agreed that the menstrual movement is medicalized, and the another aspect is corporatization. That means everything is oriented with the business, focusing on the product, focusing on the infrastructure. We are not dismantling the deep, complex, multifaceted nature of the menstrual discrimination.
Yeah.
I'm recalling the example, the menstrual practices from Ghana. In Ghana, during menstruation, the menstruators not allowed to cross the river, not allowed to face the water. In few cultures in Latin America, they cannot eat pork or milk or avocado. So while depriving from having the wasteful fruits or vegetables or water, there is a serious impact on mental health and well-being.
Absolutely. Yes, there would be, because particularly actually the body needs that nourishment of fats. Yeah. Actually, particularly then, that's that's from a nutritional perspective. And of course, our nutrition has a huge amount of impact on our mental health. Right? I work with clinical nutritionists to help a lot of my clients. When there's a problem when there's a problem in that relates, and all problems relate and impact. It's an interplay between mental health and menstruation. There's no such thing that they don't impact each other. If you have poor mental health, then your menstruation suffers. If you have poor menstruation, then your mental health suffers. So if there isn't people taking care of the body at the same time as I take care of the mind, then it becomes, it's almost an impossible task. So if people don't have access to cleanliness, if they're isolated, if they are shamed, which of course all these practices shame them, but if they don't have access to food that has good fats in it and good protein, then the whole system will move out of, it will just be depleted. There'll be weakness in the system. There'll be no life in the system, in the body, heart, and mind. So when I say body, heart, and mind, it's one thing that is mental health, but everything is related to all of it.
Yeah, very true. And let's shout out to incorporate the dignified menstruation into the mental health discourse.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, let's place WHO and other organizations who are working around mental health. Let's include the dignified menstruation, and those who are working around the menstruation or dignified menstruation, let's place to include the mental health. So the dignified menstruation and mental health is like very much intricate. We cannot separate. And for the coalition, dignified itself the another name or synonyms for the mental health. Everything connected with the dignity. Yes, whether absolutely. You are allowed to face the water or not, entering into the kitchen or not, harvesting the crops or not, or accessing the pad or not, or using the toilet or not.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is all about the dignity. That means all about the emotional health, mental health. So that is very, very intricate, but unfortunately, there is a huge gap, and together we need to shout out. Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Tammy, I like to know a little bit more about whether you have that kind of experience or not regarding the suicide. I read the one literature. The woman, while doing the autopsy for the suicidal women, the most of them are during their menstruation. So, is there any relationship between suicide and the menstruation? Do you have any idea, or do you read any paper, or do you have any clients those who have that kind of suicidal tendency because of the menstruation or menopause, something like that?
Did you say societal or suicidal?
Suicidal,
Yeah,
depression,
so one
suicidal
taking their
attempt or
own life.
tendency. Yeah.
Yes. So what happens in the week 3 and 4, right? So we have the menstrual cycle is a four-part, it's a four-part cycle, right? There is the menstruation, and then there's the follicular phase, and then there's the ovulation. So all this part, there is less of a concern. However, there's people who have obviously manifestation. Depression becomes everywhere. But in week 3 and 4, in the second part, in the luteal phase, when the body starts letting go of the inner lining of the uterus, then the hormones change. And what happens when the hormones change, I'm just not going to get into it too much, right? Because it would be too much, is that there is a direct influence on our behavior and on our way we think and the way that we feel. So on our mental health. And there is quite a risk that could be ongoing, and I can explain how, but there's quite a risk when the symptoms of a non-dignified, a discriminatory menstruation, when the hormones move and shift, there can be quite erratic behavior. Erratic behavior means it's all over the place. So as we are meant to go into a really dignified place and go to rest and be fed well, and what I call going into the red tent or going into a cave, which today is the couch with a hot water bottle and a tea. That's our that's our little menstrual cave, and somebody kind of spoiling us a little bit, and that's very dignified menstruation. That's a very optimal. When you don't have that, and you actually have restrictions, and you have punishments, and you have humiliation, then the hormonal kind of movements can make very impulsive behavior. It could mean that it can mean that distress can be so extreme that the energy can be so low in the body, and even the cognition can, because the purpose of the hormones is to put in and put us in a state where we're focusing more. There is a purpose to all of these things. There is a spiritual purpose to all of this, so that we can go inside, we can kind of dream and think and process things. So if we don't have that, we can get quite aggravated. And that's why in society, there's a lot of fear towards menstruating women, because there's a lot of power in the healthy menstruation. So if a woman doesn't have that and hasn't had that, her mother didn't have, her grandmother didn't have, her great grandmother didn't have, no one in her collective feminine didn't have, then there's a lot of resentment and anger and frustration. Because it's humiliated and non-dignified, then one turns it on herself, and there's a lot of desperation. So whether you're angry outside, that's in a very fortunate kind of situation, almost, because then people know. But if you're angry inside towards yourself, then it can be quite risky. So yes, there would be higher cases. I don't have numbers or anything, but I do know that all the other things that are manifestations of it, right, like depression or impulse control, or what's called self-regulation, self-control, autonomy, um, self-governance, all these things that are psychological measures, they don't develop well if you don't have a dignified menstruation. So then the link, one can think that it's because there is a high level, a low self-worth. Low self-worth, more suicide. Less self-regulation, more suicide. Impulse control, and then of course, if you look at how to improve all these things, then, and by regulating your own menstrual cycle, you have more self-regulation, more agency, more dignity, higher self-worth,
Yeah.
better kind of possibilities. And it goes further and further, because when we think about ability to think clearly and plan our life ahead, everything else needs to be already taken care of before. If your mother is ashamed, if your grandmother is ashamed, if your mother has eating disorders, if your mother doesn't know how to form connection with you because she's depressed, all these things have caused very, very high numbers of mental health distress for women over years and years and years. It's quite a big risk factor, but it's hard to identify. Well, today people identify it because there are measures about the premenstrual distress and about premenstrual tension. But it's not only then. Some women feel more distress in the follicular phase because they know what's coming, and they don't feel like they could feel happy. They don't feel like they can have healthy kind of sexual relations or pregnancies, or it just is so pervasive about everything. So we've spoken about this before. You know what I think? I think it's a basis for change of humanity. So what your work is, it's basically starting to bring the conversation to the everything. Unhappy women, unhappy everyone, unhappy children, unhappy aunties, unhappy sisters, unhappy. So of course unhappy men. No one wants to struggle. No one wants everyone around them to be depressed. But it's if there's no education, it's very difficult.
Yeah, very true. So we don't have excuses to not discuss about the dignified menstruation. Each moment, everyone should embrace the menstruation.
Yeah,
And
it's
this is
very
how we
urgent.
can, yeah,
It's very urgent because humanity is going in very quirky ways.
yeah.
And a lot of people are saying that, all the systems are breaking down.
Mm,
All the systems are breaking down. So, in my view, and it's not a small view, I know, it is menstruality in connecting and educating that will strengthen women and therefore families, and therefore communities. There will be more communication, more connection, more relatedness. And if that's the case, then there's a healthy way of being for the land and for what used to be pretty obvious sisterhood, right? Not kind of comparison and competition and self-judgment, but more sort of collaboration and conversation. It's a very comprehensive thing.
yeah,
And one more thing is very important. I don't know if in the Global South Coalition it's a conversation, but of course, a healthy menstruation, healthy menarche, beginning of menstruation, and a healthy menstrual 40 years of menstruating leads to healthy perimenopause. And healthy perimenopause means that you have menopausal women who don't bleed anymore, who are leaders. So it's very, very, very critical. Very critical.
Yeah. Thank you. In our case, we believe that the departure point of learning or understanding something about menstrual discriminatory practices is about 6 to 9 years, even before the menarche. And since then, the menstruators started to think low self-esteem, inferior, powerless, and when they have a menarche, it is more sensitive time, they started to feel more insecure, more unsafe, more inferior, more low self-esteem. This is how it goes throughout the life cycle. And most of the times, menstruators, no matter where they are suffering more as a victim, as a survivor, no matter whether it's a domestic violence or other forms of political or social economical violences. So it's a really very serious and unspoken agenda. We don't have much time. Uh, Actually, this is the time for the question answer, but I see only one question in the chat box. That is why I'm continuing the discussion, and the discussion is really, really rich and very much insightful. So I don't like to stop. There is a one question from Pakistan. What are some effective policy intervention that can simultaneously address both menstrual dignity and mental health challenge?
Yeah. I think that, like, if it's, I don't know a lot about policy, but for me, if I was to sit in governments and give recommendations, it would be that there are educators that understand exactly what you said, Radha, that as early as possible, we need to have almost pervasively, we need to have education for all the people who have contact with groups of children, young children, and then of course that there is education towards what a rite of passage is, which is basically some celebration. That there's like that starts becoming something that happens as part of a curriculum in school, and that doctors can identify almost who had a celebration or who didn't, who was and give so much group education for parents, men as well, absolutely everyone, giving education everywhere, just and not sort of just this is something that me and my mental health colleagues who are working, they're working mostly in the menopause space, but I always feel like I know it starts well before then, that it's not only for medical profession. It's actually every single profession needs to be educated by mental health professionals about. But then it's tricky because the mental health professionals, so they have to start bringing it into the curriculum of psychology studies. I was teaching women's development, which was one course that never existed before. I had one course that was a one-time course, and then I taught that course at university. It was a one-time course. It doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know any country that teaches women's psychology and psychology. And within that women's psychology, I knew nothing about menstruation then. I finished my whole PhD about women, and I was studying women for 20 years, and I didn't consider menstruation once. No one ever. I read a lot. I really read a lot for my PhD on women's development. So it's very broad. It wasn't one topic, it was women's development. Nothing was, menstruation wasn't mentioned. So it has to start kind of getting into universities quickly. So that's the policies that I would create. I would start bringing it into every conversation in every government, but that's almost, you know. So it has to be kind of like a, I get a little bit biblical with these things, right? Like the midwives who kind of were all taking care of Moses, right? So the midwives are the ones that teach a lot. They always teach about the body a lot. So those kind of things. Let them talk about these things. Teach them.
Yeah, we need to educate or teach or initiate the talk or dialogue wherever we are.
Yeah, wherever
And
you are.
we don't need the project. If we have a project, it will be more easier, no doubt. But we can do something even without the funding.
Yeah.
So let's continue our conversation.
Yeah.
And dear friends who are joining here through the Zoom, please write your questions, comment in chat box. I don't see the questions. Only one question from Pakistan, our good friend, our steering committee member of coalition. And I also don't see any questions in Facebook comment.
Hmm.
If you have any questions, please write here. And if
Hmm.
you don't have anything else, and if you remember later, even in that case, please write to us
Hmm.
through our Facebook or Twitter or any other means. We will try to incorporate these kind of issues in upcoming webinars.
Hmm. Yeah.
Before going to end, Dr. Tammy, you are extensively involved in the Red Tent movement. Would you share about it very briefly? We don't have much
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. I mean, the Red Tent is not a formal movement,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically there was a book called The Red Tent, which refers to practice that that may be mythological, but is probably not, because we know that in indigenous cultures there's still memories that women used to gather when they menstruate. So before there was electricity, and that's a whole kind of physiological process, then women would menstruate with a dark moon and they would ovulate with a full moon. And so they would menstruate together. And so the idea of the red tent was that women would be in seclusion because they wanted to be encased, and it wasn't a discriminatory practice. So it was a gathering. So then the book The Red Tent retells the story of a biblical story of Dinah, and that is it's just a book. It's basically a historical fiction kind of book. And then when so many people read the book, there became movements around the world that just basically met on a monthly basis because there's electricity. Not all women menstruate at the same time, and basically they just gather to have conversations. So my red tent is meets once a month in my clinic, and we sit in a circle and we have tea together, and we have conversations, and women get to ask questions. So as you know, Radha, and what I mentioned before, there's a lot of women who struggle with mental health, but also sometimes the body is what really speaks most loudly, right? So a lot of pain and a lot of distress. And today we know about endometriosis and fibroids and polycystic ovaries. There's so many conditions that are a result of so many factors, modern life and ignoring the menstrual the menstrual cycle, that women are really, really, really struggling to find doctors. So they talk about the relationships with doctors. They just share what happened when they had their first bleed. It's an ongoing group. So of course, it addresses dignifying menstruation, and it speaks by supporting each other, by having a place to share the pain and the heartache and the grief, and they get education, which is very empowering. So there's a lot of books around, and we light a candle, and we give ourselves some presents. Like we light a candle and we say our names and who we are and how old we are and where we are on our menstrual cycle, which is of course makes it um, on the one hand it makes it very visible. On the other hand, it already starts the practice of education, because a lot of people say, I don't know where I am. And we say, well, okay, well, in your next bleed, start counting. So it becomes an ongoing, and women are very, very interested in it. But again, it's a bit it provokes a lot of shame, and people are shy to come to it. So it takes a while. There are huge groups around the world, and there are smaller groups around the world. Sometimes when my teachers come to Melbourne, for example, there are hundreds of women who come to process their grief around menstruation. But when I do it in my little clinic, then there's maybe 6 and 10 women. But every time there's new ones. Today I put posters all over the city for the next one, which is on the 15th. I often do it on the full moon.
Mm.
Yeah. Does that
Okay,
make
thank you.
sense?
Yeah, because I also read the Red Tent book. It was a fiction book, and because in your bio you mention about the Red Tent movement, and I like to ask so the other friends also know it. So it depends on the interpretation, but to me, it's creating the space for the mensurators. And when it was conceptualized, it's all about the kind of dignified mensuration. They are seeking the dignified mensuration. They are thinking about themselves, loving, caring about themselves. And in general, the women or mensurators forget to take care of themselves. And when they are in menopause, they are completely new mensurators, and they just get confused, they lost, and the doctors prescribe the antipsychotic medicine without knowing their menstrual history and menopausal history, and it's really real tragic. There are so
Yes.
many things we have to address, no matter
Mm-hmm.
whether we are working around SRHR, HIV, climate justice, or esports, or mental health.
Yes,
The menstruation is still not touched. I don't
that's
believe
right.
that we work. To me, I dedicated my life for advocating dignified menstruation. That doesn't mean we make a state of dignified menstruation. No, we just
Yeah.
are in the beginning and long way
Yes.
to go. And
Yeah.
together we can make things different. This is how I think.
Yeah.
Before ending our conversation, I like to make a few announcements.
Mhm.
Uh, we will have another uh, conversation tonight after 2 hours with the goals of Emirates. And please follow our social media website and register it. It will be the closed session, not it will not be the Facebook live. And then likewise, we'll have the announcement for media fellowship. We don't have many days, just 2 days to apply. Those who are listening us, or if you have any friends, media friends working in the international media, please share this information. We'll provide the scholarship for food, accommodation, tuition fee. Uh, just the participant need to take care of the visa, international travel. That's it. And then we also have another webinar. Please keep follow us. Another webinar will be the 18th March, when The 18th March is a really special in a women's right history. That is why we picked up that date, and we will share the research findings from Sri Lanka. The Sri Lanka friends from Sri Lanka, they conducted the nationwide research on menstrual discrimination, and then that we wanted to share through our platform because they are our member organization as well as the Global South Coalition working as a advisory committee of research. So please stay tuned with us, and if you have any concerns, if you like to invite us, like including Tammy, invite us as a speaker, as a moderator, or if you like to have a one-to-one conversation, please let us know. We are here for advocating the mental health or dignified menstruation. We are all the time high up for the cause. And then if you like to organize the training, virtual training or physical training, or if you need a technical input for crafting the proposal, please let us know. We are very happy to contribute. We just need a prior information. That means in advance. I mean, we cannot do right away. Just give the few days, few week to go through the issues. With that note, thank you very much, Dr. Tammy. It's late for you. And I know you are busy because of the International Women's Day and your ongoing business as a psychotherapist, psychologist, clinical psychologist. You have so many things to do. Despite all challenges, you are here, and your very insightful inputs is very much remarkable. And this is the historical event for us because first time we dedicated the conversation on mental health while having the conversation around dignified menstruation. And we need a more conversation in future with you. Please count us as a ally, as a sister,
Whenever.
yeah. And then
So important.
I would like to request you to give the last or final message for today's webinar. We have 2 minutes to go. Please share the final message or comment or appeal to everyone who are here and who will be watching future.
Okay. I think that I'm very honored, and your invitation and your suggestion to talk was very, 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 very moving for me because I really do believe that this is the way for all of us to shift to the distress there is. And I just want people to feel really encouraged, even though we're not a lot of people, and even though we do think that this is the key to change all the distress there is in the world. It's sort of it's kind of like pilgrims everywhere. When you move in the desert, or when you move to a spiritual quest, or when you seek the God or the divine, that there's a little bit of a sense of apprehension and loneliness. And I think that it's important to know that this is a corrective factor to this, right? That there is a collaboration, and that there's not a lot of people, but there wasn't any before. So it's a bit it can be a little bit lonely. And I can imagine, rather, that for you, it can be sometimes so difficult, particularly when menstruating, particularly when the moon is dark. It can be really low. But then you have to remember that everything changes again and again and again, and that there's more and more people all the time. This never happened. I've been talking about this for, maybe 12, 13, 14, maybe 15 years now. And now so many people are talking about it, and the technology helps. So there's a lot of, it's very, very, I'm very optimistic generally as a person. So I think that it's a great start, and I'm very, very happy to talk everywhere. Really happy.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to have you.
Thank you.
Happy International Women's Day. Let's
Thank
ensure
you.
dignified menstruation to all menstruators.
Yes.
The dignified menstruation is a foundation for equality, justice, empowerment, and rights. Thank you, everyone who are joining. I saw so many friends from Nepal and outside. Mm, have a good day, good night, good evening, wherever you are. Bye.
Good night.